Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, it's great to be here.
All right, so we have had a lot of different conversations. We've had people from the administration, from the Hill. We just had Hakeem Jeffries, and we are also convening a lot of conversations with CEOs. I want to set the stage here. A lot has happened since you joined NASDAQ. The company's been around for a long time. I think a lot of people think of NASDAQ as an exchange, but it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and we have been around for 53 years, and we're really proud of that. And we're really, really proud of our foundation as a market operator. But as we've thought about how can we do more and really serve as the fabric to the financial system, we've really focused on growing and expanding our technology solutions to serve the broader financial community. And we have three key themes to that really underpin a successful market. So what does it take to run a successful market? You have to have liquidity, which means you have to have money and capital flowing in to support companies coming into the markets and capital formation as well as trading. So we have a suite of solutions that really support driving liquidity, including providing technology to 130 markets around the world and providing technology to hundreds of banks and brokers to support risk management and trade infrastructure. And then we also have our transparency pillar, which is really how do we make it so that investors can make smarter asset allocation decisions. First, our index business, which is a really marquee business in driving transparent investable products. And then also analytics and data that really support corporates and investors getting closer together and finding each other more successfully. And then the third pillar is integrity. And that really is such an important underpinning of markets. So we have a whole suite of solutions that keep criminals from coming into the capital markets through our trade surveillance tools. We root criminals out of the financial system through our anti-financial crime tools. And we support banks and brokers in their compliance programs through our regulatory reporting tools. So we really have stayed very true to who we are as a market, but now we provide very advanced technology that serves the broader financial community.
Well, I want to kind of lay the ground here for the conversation. We are in a Republican-controlled Washington. They control the Hill. They control the White House. We are seeing the impacts of a President 2.0 on tariffs and the business and the economy. What is the business world looking for from the second term of this president?
Well, I think that I think we have to understand that first, we exited 2024 with an economy that had remained resilient through a lot of change. And we saw, investors and companies really looking into 2025 saying that there's more stability in the interest rate environment, there's more stability in the inflationary environment. And really, I think that the new Trump agenda really has been one that is geared towards what can we do to unlock growth. But there's also a change agenda within the Trump administration. And right now, I think we're seeing a very early and quick start to the change agenda. But over time, as we kind of look at what does this mean over the next several years, I think that there's a view that corporates and investors are hoping to see an agenda that also provides the opportunity for more capital to come into the markets. And that can be done through a smarter regulatory framework. I really look at it as regulation is very important in our industry. Regulation is important across many industries, but really driving towards a smarter regulatory framework that really cuts down on duplication of regulation, overlapping regulation, in some cases conflicting regulation, to really unlock capital into the financial system and into other industries. And I think that's, as we look long term, I think that there's a fair amount of expectation that over time we will have that, and that will be an effect that we can have on the economy.
So there was a lot of frustration during the Biden administration about how Democrats were stifling and making it harder for companies to go public, right? Trump is potentially going to usher in a more deal-making environment. Do you think that that's right?
Well, I think that there's two elements to thinking about capital formation in the country. And it's actually kind of an interesting parallel. So on the one hand, you need to have it so that investors feel that they have some level. Investors are ready to put risk capital to work when they can kind of predict the future. So they want to have predictability. It's always been an underpinning of investors. So if you have a situation where, coming again out of 2024, interest rates are more knowable, inflation was starting to be more knowable, I think coming into 2025, there's an expectation that there could be some really great companies coming out to the public markets and investors are ready to underwrite that risk. I think right now we're just having to recognize that there's a lot of there's a level of unpredictability right now, and so therefore it could be that we're going to see that maybe push out a little bit of time, but the economic underpinnings of the economy remain really strong, and so we have to recognize that over time investors are looking for that. There are some amazing companies that want to come out. And I do think that the regulatory agenda that we've at least started to hear within the administration is one that they'll look at rational regulation around investor protection for investors as we look at what does it require for companies to be public. There are an enormous amount of obligations that have been put on companies as public companies, and some of those are very important. Obviously having really thorough and accurate financials are an underpinning of our disclosure economy. But I do think that there's other elements of the system. The proxy process is very inefficient. There are certain disclosures that are really not geared towards investor protection. And then there's a lot of overlapping regulation, again, to being a public company. And so if we want to have a healthy ecosystem of public companies, and that is very important for long-term wealth creation in this country, then it is important for us to look at that calibration. And we are looking forward to working with the administration on that. And I do believe that there's even some early signals of that coming out of the SEC. They've changed some rules on the proxy process. Mm-hmm. They're looking at disclosures. So we do think that we'll have an ability to have an open dialogue with the SEC on this.
So I want to get into some of the things that you could see, maybe like removal of regulations. But before I do, kind of industry-wise, you said things are looking a little bit better in terms of companies or that might be looking to go public. What are some predictions or areas where you think there could be some more activity that maybe have been holding off so far?
Yeah, well, first of all, as we look at the last couple of years, it has been a situation where there are a lot of companies that are doing well. They've really done a lot to make sure that they, I would say, are more efficient in their growth. Mm-hmm. And so if coming out of an environment where money was really free, it's one of those things where it was kind of a growth at all costs environment. Well, I think that over the last couple of years, a lot of companies have recognized that efficient growth is the best growth. It's sustainable. Cash flows are really important to creating sustainable businesses. So there's been a ton of focus on that within the corporate community to get themselves ready to come out into the public markets in a way as stronger companies. And they have done that. And so across the tech sector and the healthcare sector, you're seeing some really great companies that have grown and they've expanded while also really looking at and focusing on cash flows. That's a very, very healthy way to come into the markets. And there are a lot of investors that are very excited about those companies coming out. And now it's a matter of just, as you know, the markets are there to predict the future. So now it's a matter of investors feeling confident in their ability to predict the future, to know what are the future cash flows and earnings potential of these companies. Can I underwrite that risk when I've never seen this company before, right? I don't have a history of this company. So am I ready to underwrite that risk? And the answer is, I think that there are amazing companies across the tech sector, the healthcare sector, some industrial sectors that are really, really good and strong businesses ready to come out. And now it's a matter of investors being ready to underwrite the risk.
So as you mentioned, you kind of see NASDAQ working with the SEC, with the Trump administration in terms of cutting regulation. The president is going to be meeting with the BRT later today. You'll be hearing directly from him. What's one or two things that you want to hear? Is it about the markets? Is it about tariffs? Is it something else?
Well, I take a long-term view towards everything. And actually, I'll give you an example. If you think about the markets, there are a lot of moments in time in the markets that have kind of the short-term wins can kind of sway the markets in one direction or another. But over the long term, the markets really reflect the growth potential of this country. And it also reflects the innovation potential of this country. And what is really remarkable, and I of course come at it from the point of view of NASDAQ, is that over a 40-year period of time, for as long as the NASDAQ 100 has existed, it has delivered a 14% annual compounded return. And that shows you the power of the capital markets to really underpin the economy, but also to drive wealth creation for everyday citizens across this country. And so as I think about what we're looking for in terms of the ability for us to continue to drive that growth agenda, to make sure that we're really focused on maximizing the capital that can be deployed inside the country and around the world to drive that growth agenda, I'm going to be interested in understanding kind of the conversation in that context to see what is the longer term future that we hope to be able to achieve.
So you mentioned that there were some things you thought this administration could do when it comes to reducing regulation, which is clearly going to be one of the Trump's second-term initiatives. What are is there one or two things that you think in particular you'd like to see the SEC take on to say, hey, this could actually really be more advantageous, more companies would go public?
Well, I think certainly there are areas of proxy reform that I think that are very obvious. You know, there's a mismatch in terms of what I would say the power structure that exists between the proxy advisory firms and the corporate community and the investment community. And there are situations where those proxy advisors can put out a recommendation based on false information. And there's currently not a clear path for companies to be able to correct that information before the recommendation is made. So there's no communication there. And there's frankly no oversight of these proxy advisors by any regulators. So that's, I think, something that is important. That's actually asking for regulation. I realize that, but it really is to kind of make sure that there's a proper check on what I would say that power structure across those three entities. And then the second thing is also focusing on disclosures and including accounting policies. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but the PCAOB is a kind of accounting standards provider for the country. Very important organization. And at times, they will come out with recommendations that would put an enormous burden on public companies. And they did attempt to do that under the prior administration with certain rules around looking at legal risks, which are very important, but it was such a huge swing that would have actually, even the accounting firm said, this is not actually a reasonable new standard to put in place. So we have seen that has been pulled back, which is excellent. And so we've just got to make sure that we're kind of creating that check and balance between what do investors need to make sure that they are properly protected? What do investors need to also make sure that they have a market environment that is functional? And then what do corporates need to make it so that they feel like they can access capital successfully? Let's make sure we're focusing on all three of those as the mandate of the SEC, and we're excited to work with them in the next several years. And we're always excited, frankly, to work with them on all of that.
So you have focused a lot on financial crime as a company, it is kind of going more into technology. Is there more that Washington and the Trump administration could be doing on this issue?
Well, I think that there's more that the entire world can be doing on this issue. So I don't think it's any one administration or any one body, actually. If we think about the size of the problem, about $3 trillion is laundered across the financial system every year globally. And about $500 billion is lost to fraud globally. And that is an enormous tax on the people of this world. If you think about what's happened there, lives are ruined or at least disrupted, money is stolen, and there's no one body in the world that can solve that problem. The banks have essentially been put on the front lines to try to solve this problem, but they need that public-private partnership. They need to be able to engage with law enforcement, which they do. And I would have to say, I think the United States is very good. I mean, if I could compare it to other countries, I actually think we're more advanced than a lot of other countries in having a public-private partnership. There is a feedback loop, but there can be more of a feedback loop between the regulators like FinCEN, the law enforcement agencies, and the banks to make sure that as we are working with the banks, we have very advanced technology and we do use AI capabilities. We bring data across banks to find very specific topologies of criminal activity. They do bank across multiple banks, so no one bank can solve this problem. So you have to assume that criminals will bank across multiple banks. They are very sophisticated in perpetrating their crimes, but they do leave fingerprints. And so if we can leverage data very successfully, bring AI capabilities and frankly more advanced AI, which is something we've been asking for, to unleash the power of that technology to be able to root out the criminals. We then create the alerts for the banks. It's more efficient because we don't send them as many false positives.
Sure.
We send them more accurate data. And then we automate the capability for them to actually investigate those potential criminals to write up the reports. What would be really great is we got a feedback loop after the reports were written to say, yes, that actually ended up being a criminal or not. Because if that were the case, even if it's in a lag, we can then improve the topologies of our engines, right? So there's a lot we can still do. But there is a lot, I have to say the banks have taken this extraordinarily seriously. They do recognize the role that they play in society. they really do. I mean, it's obviously a financial calculus for them, but it's also a responsibility to their clients, and they know it. But they can't do it alone. So we are working very hard to make sure that law enforcement, regulators, and banks are looking at this problem collectively.
I want to shift gears a little bit. You are also a member of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. There's been some concerns about what tariffs are going to do, and the kind of the current Trump administration's policies, implementing or pulling back. Do you think they're inflationary?
So it's interesting. There was a study that was done actually by the New York Fed on the tariffs that were implemented back in 2018. And it was an interesting evaluation. So I think that it's important to recognize the difference between an input tariff and an end product tariff. Right? An end product tariff is if you actually keep another end product from coming in without a tax, and you therefore bolster the advantage that a domestic product might have over that foreign product in terms of the economy, that can actually result in the domestic company actually having an advantage, or a price advantage, essentially. And that could also bolster the ability or the potential for that company to be successful, right? That's an end product tariff. When you have an input price tariff, an input tariff, where you have an input into an end product, and you also know, of course, that end products go across borders multiple times sometimes before they're an end product. That actually creates more of a challenge because it can create some inflationary pressures, but it also actually brings down the growth of that company, because that means that even a domestic company has to pay more to create a domestic product because they're taking a product and they're taking an input from a foreign country. Very hard to change quickly. So therefore, their products end up becoming more expensive. Right. And that can be both somewhat inflationary, but it also can result in lower growth. So the 2018 study actually showed that there was more of an impact on growth. And I think that's something we also have to recognize, that it's not just about, it's all of those things together that define what the monetary policymakers determine in terms of how to affect monetary policy. I think that's a really important it's a three-dimensional way of looking at what might happen as a result of tariffs. I think that it was a good study to evaluate.
But from your own perspective, right, certainty is kind of what business is looking for, and we are in a very uncertain time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say investors, and I always look at it from investors, and of course corporates, for companies to underwrite long-term investments, and that's what, capital investments are, R&D, especially in terms of certain industries, those investments can be very long-term in nature. They always prefer to have certainty to know what kind of return are they going to get on that investment. And then, of course, for investors, they have to understand, and they have to do a spreadsheet, and they have to say, what does the 5 to 10-year future of a company look like, right? And if they don't know what the cost of capital is going to be, they don't know what the inflationary environment is going to be, they don't know what the growth environment is going to be, it's hard to do that. And that's actually the environment they've been living in for the last 2 years. I mean, we have to recognize that actually has been, one of the biggest challenges to to having the IPO environment be healthy over the last 2 years. Those things have not been predictable over the last 2 years. So I think that people were, kind of coming into this year looking at a little bit more certainty. We do know also, though, we have a president with a change agenda. So as we kind of look through all of that, and we look at the resilience of the economy, and we look at the fact that this is the land of innovation, it's the land of opportunity, I'm an optimist. I continue to be very optimistic about the power that this country can give to the world.
What's the one thing you think Washington should be paying attention to that it isn't when it comes to the financial sector?
I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I'm always about looking at the long-term health of the financial system. And I guess, honestly, I'd say that in the long term, the most important thing we can do is create a better path to the public markets for companies. Because when you really think about the everyday investor and what is going to drive wealth creation for that person, it is their ability to interact with and engage with the markets. And I know that sounds like, there's a lot of different opinions about that, but the power of compounding returns is a remarkable power. So I always look long-term, as I mentioned, that 40-year return. I look at the fact that if they can put some money into the market, if they have enough savings to be able to put some money into the market and have that market deliver for them, over the long term, it will enable them to pay for a house, pay for schools, pay for their future. And so getting more companies out there that are in the public domain, that allow investors to be able to invest in the growth of this country, that to me is by far the most important thing that we can focus on. But of course, that's from my perspective.
All right, well, we are going to leave it there. Adena Friedman, thank you so much.
Thank you.